Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. 4 months ago, I was just another guy living in suburban Connecticut, working from home as a systems analyst for a mid-sized insurance company. The kind of person who waters their lawn on weekends and waves at neighbors without really knowing them. I lived in one of those cookie-cutter developments where every third house has the same floor plan, just mirrored. My wife Jennifer and I had moved there 2 years earlier when she got pregnant with our daughter Lily. It was supposed to be the perfect place to raise a family. Quiet streets, good schools, low crime rates. The most exciting thing that ever happened was when someone's recycling bin blew into the street during a storm. That all changed the day I decided to befriend Walter Brennan, the strange old man who lived in the Colonial at the end of our cul-de-sac. Walter had lived there since before the development expanded, his house one of the original properties from the 1960s. While the rest of us had neat Kentucky bluegrass and decorative mailboxes, his place looked forgotten by time. The paint was this faded yellow that might have been cheerful once, and his garage door had these rust stains that looked like dried tears running down the panels. He kept odd hours. I'd see lights flickering in his basement at 3 a.m. when I got up to check on Lily, and delivery trucks would pull up to his house at the strangest times. Medical supply companies, electronic retailers, even a refrigerated truck from some laboratory equipment supplier. The other neighbors whispered about him being a hoarder or maybe running some kind of illegal business, but nobody ever actually talked to him. He'd lived there for 15 years, they said, ever since he retired from some biotech company in Boston. The day everything started, I was dealing with a network issue that had me pulling my hair out. Our internet kept dropping every few minutes, making it impossible to work. After 3 hours on the phone with our provider, they told me the problem might be interference from another network in the area. Their technician mentioned something about unusually strong signals coming from nearby, possibly ham radio or someone running serious server equipment. That's when I remembered all those electronic deliveries at Walter's place. I figured maybe the old guy had some amateur radio setup that was messing with our connection. So I did what I'd been avoiding for 2 years. I walked over to introduce myself and ask if he could help me figure out the interference issue. It was around 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of drowsy afternoon where the whole neighborhood feels deserted. Walter answered the door wearing a pristine lab coat over regular clothes, which struck me as bizarre for someone who'd been retired for over a decade. He had these pale gray eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me, and his fingers were stained with what looked like iodine. The smell that wafted out from his house was this weird mix of antiseptic and something else I couldn't place. Metallic and slightly sweet, like copper pennies soaked in syrup. When I explained about the internet issues, his whole demeanor shifted. He got this intense look of interest, almost excitement, and invited me in immediately. Said he'd been having similar problems and maybe we could troubleshoot together. The eagerness in his voice should have been my first warning, but I was desperate to get back online for work. As I stepped into his foyer, I noticed medical textbooks stacked on every surface, some so old their spines were crumbling, others brand new with topics I couldn't even pronounce. He led me through a narrow hallway lined with framed medical degrees and certifications I'd never heard of, institutes from Eastern Europe, credentials in languages I couldn't identify. The living room had been converted into some kind of workspace, with multiple computer monitors arranged in a semicircle and cables snaking across the floor like black veins. But it was the basement door that caught my attention. It had 3 different locks on it, including what looked like a biometric scanner, and there was this faint humming sound coming from below, rhythmic and mechanical. Walter noticed me looking and quickly steered me toward his computer setup, explaining he'd built his own server farm for research purposes. He pulled up network diagnostic tools I recognized from my work, and sure enough, there were multiple encrypted networks broadcasting from his location. The signal strength was insane, way beyond what any home setup should produce. As he typed, I noticed his screens kept flashing with notifications from what looked like encrypted chat channels. The usernames were all medical terms mixed with numbers: Scalpel 447, Neurocut 23, Bloodwork Live. Walter quickly minimized these windows, but not before I caught glimpses of thumbnail images that made my stomach turn. They looked like surgical procedures, but something about them was wrong. The angles were too cinematic, the lighting too deliberate, like someone had turned an operating room into a film set. Walter must have sensed my discomfort because he suddenly became very chatty, asking about my work, my family, how long I'd lived in the neighborhood. His questions felt probing, like he was cataloging information about me. Then he said something that made every hair on my neck stand up. "You know, with your technical background and my medical expertise, we could do incredible things together. I've been looking for someone with your exact skill set." Before I could respond, he stood up and walked to a cabinet filled with old medical instruments. He pulled out what looked like a vintage bone saw, running his finger along the blade while he talked. Modern medicine has become so restricted, so bound by ethics committees and regulations. But there's a whole community of people who understand that real progress requires flexibility. He set the saw down and turned back to his computers, pulling up what appeared to be a private browser. "Let me show you something fascinating. Consider it a professional courtesy between neighbors." His fingers flew across the keyboard, entering passwords and navigating through layers of encryption I recognized as Tor routing. The screen finally loaded to show a sleek black interface with a logo that looked like a scalpel crossed with a Wi-Fi symbol. Below it read, "MedStream Dark, where science meets spectacle." The page was full of thumbnail previews, each showing what appeared to be surgical procedures in progress. But these weren't educational videos from medical schools. The production quality was too high, the camera angles too artistic. Some had viewer counts in the thousands, with price tags attached: $500 for basic procedures, up to $10,000 for something labeled Premium Experimental Series. Walter clicked on one of the previews, and I caught a glimpse of a masked figure in surgical scrubs standing over an unconscious patient, addressing the camera like a game show host. The chat sidebar was exploding with messages, people bidding amounts, making requests. I felt sick. Walter watched my face carefully as he explained. It started as educational content for medical students in countries with limited resources, but the audience evolved. Now we have collectors, enthusiasts, people who appreciate the artistry of the human form. The subjects are volunteers, of course, well-compensated volunteers. He paused, letting that sink in. Your network expertise could help us expand. Better encryption, smoother streaming, maybe even interactive features. Think of the possibilities. I stood up so fast the chair knocked backward. My mouth was dry and I could hear my pulse thundering in my ears. I need to go. My wife, she's expecting me to pick up Lily from daycare. It was a lie. Jennifer handled pickup on Tuesdays, but I needed out of that house immediately. Walter's expression didn't change, but something shifted in those gray eyes. He moved between me and the hallway, not quite blocking my path, but making his presence known. I understand this is a lot to process, but please understand, discretion is vital here. We're dealing with powerful people, wealthy clients, who value their privacy above all else. They wouldn't appreciate knowing an outsider has seen their playground. His voice was calm, conversational even, but the threat was clear. He reached into his lab coat pocket and I tensed, but he only pulled out a business card. Not a normal business card, it was black metal, with just a QR code etched into it. Think about my offer. The compensation is substantial. 6 figures just to start, plus bonuses based on viewer engagement. But more importantly, think about your family. Jennifer works at that dental office on Maple Street, doesn't she? And little Lily goes to Sunshine Academy? The way he said their names so casually, like we were old friends, it made my skin crawl. He knew exactly where my wife worked, where my daughter spent her days. As he walked me to the door, he kept talking about the technical challenges, the encryption protocols. as if we were discussing a normal IT project. At the threshold, he put a hand on my shoulder. His grip was stronger than I expected for a man in his 70s. "I'll give you 48 hours to consider. After that, I'll need an answer. And remember, we're neighbors. We see each other every day. Our families are so close, practically intertwined in this little community." He smiled then, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Oh, and don't worry about your internet issues. I'll adjust my signal strength. Consider it a gesture of good faith." The door closed behind me with a soft click, but I heard all 3 locks engage immediately after. I stumbled back to my house, my legs feeling like rubber. Jennifer was in the kitchen when I walked in, and she immediately knew something was wrong. I told her everything: the dark web operation, the illegal surgeries, the threat to our family. She wanted to call the police right away, but I stopped her. What evidence did we have? Walter had been careful to show me everything on his computers, nothing I could prove. And those powerful clients he mentioned, what if some of them were local law enforcement? We spent that night huddled together, checking and rechecking our locks, peeking through blinds at Walter's house. The basement lights were on, and I could see shadows moving behind the small windows. Around midnight, 3 cars pulled up to his house. Expensive cars, a Tesla, a Mercedes, and something European I couldn't identify. People got out wearing medical masks and sunglasses despite the darkness, carrying metal briefcases. They stayed for 4 hours. The next morning I made my decision. I couldn't risk my family's safety, but I also couldn't let this continue. I drove to the FBI field office in New Haven and told them everything. The agent who interviewed me seemed skeptical at first, but when I mentioned the site name and described the setup, her demeanor changed completely. Turns out they'd been tracking Medstream Dark for 2 years, but could never pinpoint the source. Within 6 hours, they had a warrant. The raid happened that night: FBI, DEA, even Homeland Security. They found Walter's basement had been converted into a fully functional operating theater with broadcast equipment that rivaled professional studios. The refrigerated trucks, they'd been bringing in surgical supplies, and according to the agents who briefed me later, biological materials they wouldn't elaborate on. Walter was arrested along with 2 assistants who lived in the neighboring town. They found financial records showing millions in cryptocurrency transactions, client lists that included names from around the world. The investigation is still ongoing, but they told me Walter won't be returning to our neighborhood, or any neighborhood, for a very long time. We moved 2 months later, couldn't stand looking at that yellow house every day. Sometimes I still check the locks obsessively, still jump when delivery trucks drive by. But my family is safe, and that dark network is shut down. The FBI agent told me I did the right thing, that my technical knowledge helped them crack encryption they'd been struggling with. I try to focus on that when the nightmares come. College was bleeding me dry, and I needed a laptop that wouldn't completely destroy what was left of my financial aid. After scrolling through overpriced machines on regular sites, my roommate Tyler mentioned this obscure forum he'd found through some tech channels. Said people sold stuff there for way cheaper, no questions asked. The link required 3 different proxy servers just to access, which should have been my first red flag, but desperation makes you stupid. Found a listing for a decent gaming laptop at a third of retail price. The seller only communicated through encrypted messages, insisted on cryptocurrency payment, and wanted the delivery sent to a P.O. box I'd rent specifically for this transaction. Weird, yeah, but I figured they were just paranoid about taxes or something. The laptop arrived in a beat-up cardboard box with no return address, wrapped in so much bubble wrap it took me 20 minutes to dig it out. Thing looked practically new, silver aluminum body, barely a scratch on it. Keyboard keys still had that subtle texture that wears off after a few months of use. Booted up fine, Windows freshly installed, all the drivers working perfectly. I ran every virus scan I could think of, checked for keyloggers, even did a clean Windows install myself just to be safe. For the first week, it was perfect. handled my programming assignments without breaking a sweat, ran games smoothly, battery life was solid. Then one night while I was working on a database project, this folder just appeared on my desktop. Recovered files, it said, timestamp showing it had been created 30 seconds ago while I was staring right at the screen. Inside were dozens of video files, each labeled with dates going back 3 years. The thumbnails showed glimpses of what looked like security camera footage, grainy shots of living rooms, bedrooms, even bathrooms. My cursor hovered over the first file, dated from the oldest set. Part of me knew I should delete everything immediately, report it maybe. But curiosity is a hell of a drug. The video opened to show a family having dinner, completely unaware they were being watched. The camera angle was weird, like it was hidden inside something, maybe a smoke detector or air vent. The audio was crystal clear though. I could hear every word as they discussed their daughter's ballet recital, the father's promotion at work, mundane stuff that felt violating to witness. The footage jumped to different rooms, following their movements throughout their house, always from these concealed angles. The next few videos showed the same family over several months, and that's when things got dark. Their conversations became tense, stressed. The father kept mentioning money problems, some kind of debt he couldn't pay. In one video, the mother was crying in their bedroom, whispering to someone on the phone about threats they'd been receiving. She mentioned specific amounts, 50,000, then 75,000, numbers that kept climbing. The timestamp showed these videos were taken just days apart. By the fifth video, they had luggage in their living room, talking about staying with relatives, about keeping their daughter safe. The camera followed them to every room as they packed, as they held each other, as they tried to explain to their 6-year-old why they had to leave their home. Whoever was recording had complete access to their most private moments, their fears, their plans to escape. More folders started appearing while I watched. Bank statements, email archives, social media logs, all belonging to different people. The bank records showed regular deposits of varying amounts. $15,000 here, $23,000 there, always from different accounts, always just under the reporting threshold. One spreadsheet had names, addresses, and payment schedules. Some entries were marked complete in green, others in progress in yellow, and a few were bright red with defaulted next to amounts that made my stomach turn. These weren't just random victims. Each folder contained detailed surveillance notes, psychological profiles, family weaknesses to exploit. One file on a teacher named Douglas Hart noted his gambling addiction, his daughter's medical bills, exactly how much pressure would make him crack. Another on a small business owner documented her affair, complete with photos that would destroy her marriage, her reputation, everything she'd built. I slammed the laptop shut and paced my dorm room, trying to process what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't just some used computer, it was a blackmailer's entire operation, and somehow it was all resurfacing on my machine. Tyler was out at his night class, wouldn't be back for hours. I needed to think, to figure out what to do with this evidence. When I finally opened the laptop again, a new file was sitting on the desktop, a photo of me taken from outside our dorm window. In the image, I could see myself from 20 minutes ago, pacing back and forth, the timestamp matching exactly when I'd been freaking out. My room was on the 3rd floor. Whoever took this had to be on the roof of the building across the quad, or using a drone, or I didn't want to think about the other possibilities. A text document appeared next to the photo, just 2 lines. "You have their files now. Finish what Nathan couldn't." Nathan. So that was the previous owner's name. My fingers trembled as I opened the laptop's system files, digging through directories that should have been wiped clean. Found traces of old user profiles, cached data that somehow survived the supposed fresh install. In the app data folder, buried deep, was Nathan's personal journal, text files dated up until just 2 months ago. His early entries read like instruction manuals: how to install hidden cameras, which malware worked best for remote access, the perfect psychological pressure points for different personality types. But the later entries were different. Paranoid ramblings about someone called the Architect, who ran the whole network, who never showed their face, who communicated only through encrypted channels. Nathan had tried to quit, wanted out after seeing what happened to families he'd destroyed. His final entry was just one line: "They know I kept copies, they're coming." The laptop screen flickered, and new windows started opening on their own. Chat logs, video feeds, financial records, all active, all current. One feed showed a woman in her kitchen, timestamp reading today's date, making dinner while her kids did homework at the table. Another showed an elderly man in his study, going through bills with shaking hands. These weren't old recordings. These were live streams from cameras that were still active, still recording, still violating people's lives right now. A chat window popped up in the corner, messages flowing in from usernames like Collector7 and Watchdog Beta, discussing their targets, sharing footage, celebrating successful extractions. They were talking about the woman in the kitchen, about how her husband's gambling debts made her vulnerable, about how much they could squeeze from her mother's retirement fund. Then one message made everything stop. New asset online. Nathan's replacement is viewing feeds. Welcome to the network, Asset 1127. Asset 1127. That was me. They'd assigned me a number like I was already part of their system. The chat exploded with activity. Users welcoming me, sharing beginner tips, posting links to encrypted drives full of surveillance tools. Someone called Supervisor Delta sent a private message with an address just 6 blocks from campus, said my starter package would be there by midnight. Cameras, keystroke loggers, everything I'd need for my first assignment. They'd already picked my target, a professor at my own university, Dr. Elaine Foster from the economics department. Her file materialized on my desktop, complete with her class schedule, home address, photos of her family, and a note about her son's special needs therapy that cost more than her salary could cover. The message was clear: compromise her computer, install the surveillance software, find leverage, extract payment. They even included a step-by-step guide, like it was some twisted homework assignment. I tried to close the laptop, but it wouldn't shut down. Tried pulling the battery, but it was sealed in. Even unplugging it didn't work. The thing kept running, screen glowing, feed streaming. More photos appeared on the desktop. Tyler coming back from class, my mother at her job in Oregon, my little sister outside her high school. The message was clear without words. I was in their system now, and everyone I cared about was within their reach. A countdown timer appeared in the corner of the screen. 72 hours to complete my first assignment, or face integration penalties. Nathan's journal had mentioned those penalties. The lucky ones just had their lives destroyed financially. The unlucky ones, their families received packages with fingers or woke up to empty beds where children used to sleep. I sat there in my dorm room, listening to Tyler's key in the lock, wondering how to explain that I'd just accidentally joined a blackmail ring that might kill us both if I tried to leave. Tyler walked in, earbuds still in, completely oblivious to my panic. Told him I was sick, food poisoning from the cafeteria, and he bought it without question. Spent the next 6 hours researching everything I could about the laptop, the network, Nathan's disappearance. Found a news article from 2 months ago about a body pulled from the river 3 towns over. Dental records confirming it was Nathan Briggs, 24, computer science graduate. Cause of death? Drowning, though the coroner noted unusual bruising patterns on his wrists and ankles. His laptop was never recovered, until now. The more I dug, the more I realized this network was massive. Similar drownings in 12 states. All young tech-savvy people who'd gone missing with their equipment. But I also found something else in Nathan's hidden files. Something the network didn't know he'd saved. Source code for their entire surveillance system, including a kill switch that would brick every connected device and corrupt their servers. He'd been building it before he died, labeled it Insurance Dexy with detailed notes on how to deploy it. The countdown hit 48 hours remaining. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, just stared at the feed still streaming on my screen. Dr. Foster was in one of them now, grading papers in her home office while her 12-year-old son practiced violin in the next room. The software they wanted me to install was already downloaded, waiting. But so was Nathan's kill switch. I had two choices: become their asset 1127 and destroy innocent lives, or use Nathan's final gift and pray it worked before they realized what I'd done. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with a photo of my sister getting into her car after school, taken just minutes ago. Another buzz, this time my mom at the grocery store. They were showing me how easy it was, how close they were to everyone I loved. But Nathan had been smart. His kill switch didn't just destroy data, it sent everything to the FBI Cybercrime Division, state police, even international law enforcement. One click and their entire operation would be exposed. I opened the command prompt, typed in the execution path Nathan had hidden in his notes. My finger hovered over the enter key as another message popped up. Assignment reminder, 47 hours, 58 minutes remaining. The architect is watching. I hit enter. The screen exploded with code, windows flashing open and closed faster than I could read them. Nathan's program was working, spreading through their network like digital wildfire. The surveillance feed started glitching, freezing, then going black one by one. Chat windows filled with panic, users screaming about lost connections, corrupted files, FBI warnings popping up on their screens. The laptop grew hot under my hands, fans screaming as it processed thousands of operations per second. Then came the automated message Nathan had programmed. Every victim in their database received an email with recordings of their surveillance, contact information for law enforcement, and evidence of who had been watching them. Dr. Foster would wake up tomorrow knowing she was free. That family from the first video would learn their nightmare had names and faces. But I knew this wasn't over. The architect was still out there, and I'd just destroyed years of their work. I grabbed my emergency cash, threw some clothes in a bag, and left the laptop still running its destruction sequence on my desk. Made it to the bus station using only back roads, paying cash for a ticket to wherever was leaving first. Ended up being Chicago. Ditched my phone in a dumpster behind campus, bought a burner at a truck stop. For 3 days, I watched the news from cheap motel rooms. The story broke everywhere. Massive blackmail ring exposed in multi-state FBI raid. 43 arrests in the first week, more following as they traced the network. They found hidden cameras in hundreds of homes, recovered millions in extorted funds. But they never mentioned the architect, never found the person at the top. I stayed hidden for 2 months, working cash jobs, never staying anywhere long. Finally felt safe enough to contact my family through a lawyer, let them know I was alive. The FBI wanted to talk to me, said I was a hero, but I knew better. Heroes don't run. Heroes don't leave laptops full of evidence burning themselves out in dorm rooms. I did what I had to do to survive, to save those people, to honor Nathan's sacrifice. These days, I fix computers at a small shop in a town you've never heard of, always paying cash, always watching over my shoulder. Because sometimes late at night, I still get emails on accounts I never created, with just one line. The architect remembers. Everything started with a simple DM that changed my entire world. I'm 23, graduated college last spring with a communications degree and about $40,000 in debt. Phoenix isn't exactly the modeling capital of America, but I'd been getting compliments on my photos since high school. Clear skin, distinctive features, the kind of face that photographs well under different lighting. Living paycheck to paycheck at a local coffee shop, I was desperate for any extra income when this recruiter reached out through Instagram. Her profile seemed legit. Professional headshots, client testimonials, links to actual modeling agencies. She went by Vanessa Torres and claimed to represent emerging talent for commercial campaigns across the Southwest. The initial conversation felt completely normal. Vanessa explained she'd found me through hashtags on some selfies I'd posted. Said I had exactly what her clients were seeking for an upcoming campaign. Nothing too glamorous, just standard headshots for a lifestyle brand, she claimed. The pay was decent, $800 for a simple photo shoot, and all I had to do was submit high-resolution images of myself from multiple angles. No studio visit required, no meeting in person, just professional quality photos I could take myself. She even sent me detailed instructions about lighting, background requirements, and specific poses they needed. The whole thing seemed straightforward, maybe even too good to be true. But I was broke and willing to take the chance. I spent an entire weekend setting up the perfect shots in my apartment. Vanessa's instructions were incredibly specific. She wanted me photographed from at least 12 different angles, including straight-on portraits, three-quarter profiles, and even some shots with my eyes closed or mouth slightly open. She claimed the client needed options for different expressions and lighting scenarios. I borrowed my roommate's DSLR camera and set up a makeshift studio using white bed sheets and desk lamps. The process took hours, adjusting lighting, checking each shot for clarity, making sure every detail of my face was perfectly visible. I even followed her request for photos without makeup, then with minimal makeup, then with a full face. By Sunday evening, I had over 50 high-resolution images that captured every angle, every expression, every subtle detail of my features. 2 days later, I uploaded everything to the secure file-sharing link Vanessa provided. The website required me to create an account and verify my identity with my driver's license, which should have been my first red flag, but she explained it was standard practice for model verification. I submitted the photos along with my full legal name, address, and even my social security number for the supposed tax paperwork. Vanessa confirmed receipt within hours, thanked me for my professionalism, and promised I'd hear about the campaign results within 2 weeks. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and despite my follow-up messages, Vanessa's Instagram account suddenly went private, then disappeared entirely. I figured I'd been scammed out of my time and effort, wrote it off as a learning experience, and tried to forget about the whole thing. 4 months later, my phone buzzed with a fraud alert from my bank at 3:47 a.m. Someone had attempted to open a checking account using my name and social security number at a branch in Miami, a city I'd never even visited. When I called the fraud department that morning, the representative explained that whoever tried to open the account had provided what appeared to be a legitimate driver's license with my information. But the photo looked slightly different from my actual license. Different enough that the teller became suspicious and flagged it. The bank's security footage showed a woman who resembled me, but with different hair and clothing style, confidently presenting documents that bore my personal information. My heart started racing as I realized this wasn't just some random identity theft. Someone had specifically targeted my face. The real nightmare began when I decided to investigate further. I started by reverse searching some of the photos I'd submitted to Vanessa, using Google's image search feature to see if they'd appeared anywhere online. What I found made me physically sick. My face was scattered across dozens of websites, most of them buried deep in search results or hidden behind login screens. But the most disturbing discovery came when I found a forum discussing high-quality facial overlays, where users were sharing tips about the best sources for realistic photos. One commenter mentioned a specific marketplace where you could purchase complete facial packages, and when I managed to access it through a friend who knew about these things, I saw my own face staring back at me from multiple listings. The marketplace was like some twisted version of an online store, complete with product descriptions and customer reviews. My photos were being sold in different packages. Premium Identity Kit, $200, included my frontal shots and profile views, while Complete Transformation Bundle, $500, offered every single image I'd submitted, organized by expression and angle. The product descriptions were chilling. They advertised my face as ideal for financial applications, perfect bone structure for deep fake generation, and tested successful for document verification. Even worse were the customer reviews. People were rating my face like it was a product, commenting on how realistic the results were and sharing tips about which angles worked best for different types of fraud. One reviewer mentioned successfully using my photos to rent an apartment in Dallas, while another bragged about opening 3 different credit cards. The scope of what was happening began to dawn on me as I dug deeper into the site. There were tutorials on how to use deepfake software to place my face onto other people's bodies for fake social media profiles, guides for creating convincing fake driver's licenses, and even instructions for making realistic passport photos. My friend helped me access some of the buyer accounts, and we discovered that my face had been purchased over 60 times in the past 3 months. 60 different people now had high-resolution images of my face, complete with the detailed angles and expressions needed to impersonate me convincingly. The thought of strangers walking around with my identity, opening accounts in my name, potentially committing crimes while wearing my face, made me feel completely violated and helpless. Over the next few weeks, the consequences of this digital identity theft began manifesting in terrifying ways. I received calls from collection agencies about debts I'd never incurred, including a $3,000 medical bill from a hospital in Atlanta and overdue rent notices for apartments in 3 different states. A police detective from Nevada contacted me about a woman who'd been caught shoplifting while carrying a fake ID with my information. Thankfully, the security footage showed clear differences between us, but the fact that someone was committing crimes using my identity made me realize how serious this had become. Most disturbing was when my actual employer received a call from someone claiming to be me, asking about my work schedule and personal details. The caller sounded nothing like me, but they had enough information about my life to convince the initial receptionist. The psychological impact was overwhelming. Every time my phone rang, I expected another fraud alert or legal complication. I became paranoid about leaving my apartment, constantly wondering if I'd encounter one of my impersonators face to face on the street. Sleep became impossible as I'd lie awake imagining all the ways my stolen identity was being used. I'd check my credit report obsessively, monitor my bank accounts multiple times daily, and even set up Google alerts for my name in case news stories emerged about crimes committed by my doppelgangers. The worst part was feeling completely powerless. Law enforcement seemed baffled by the scope of the problem. Credit agencies could only flag accounts after they'd already been opened, and the marketplace selling my face operated in jurisdictions where American authorities had limited reach. Everything changed when I decided to take matters into my own hands. Through online research and connecting with other victims in similar situations, I learned about a cybersecurity firm that specialized in digital identity theft cases. They weren't cheap, $5,000 up front, but they had experience tracking down these underground marketplaces and getting images removed. The process took 2 months of intensive work, but they managed to identify the actual servers hosting my photos and coordinate with international authorities to shut down the specific listings. More importantly, they helped me implement a comprehensive protection strategy, freezing my credit with all major bureaus, setting up monitoring services for any new accounts opened in my name, and even working with facial recognition companies to flag my biometric data as stolen. They also helped me create a legal paper trail documenting the theft, which proved invaluable when dealing with fraudulent accounts. 6 months later, the immediate crisis has mostly subsided, though I still deal with occasional fraud alerts and the lingering anxiety of wondering who might still have my photos saved on their devices. The cybersecurity firm estimated they successfully removed about 85% of my images from accessible marketplaces, and the original seller's operation was apparently shut down entirely. I've since moved to a different state, changed my legal name slightly, and now maintain an extremely minimal online presence. While I can't undo what happened or reclaim every stolen photo, I've regained control over my identity and learned to recognize the warning signs that I missed initially. The experience taught me that our faces are essentially permanent passwords in an increasingly digital world, and once someone steals that password, the damage can spread faster and wider than anyone realizes until it's too late. October had always been my favorite month in Sacramento. Cool mornings, perfect weather for jogging, and the maple trees on our street turning those brilliant orange colors that make everything feel like a postcard. I'd been living on Maple Grove Drive for 6 years. Same insurance adjuster job, same routine of morning coffee and evening Netflix. At 34, I thought I had my quiet suburban life figured out. The neighborhood was one of those places where the biggest drama was whose turn it was to host the annual block party, and everyone knew each other just enough to exchange pleasantries about the weather. The Hendersons next door had moved to Florida in August, leaving their house empty with a for sale sign that seemed to mock the stagnant real estate market. Everything about my world was predictable, comfortable, and safe. That Tuesday morning when I woke up to find every device in my house showing no internet connection, I figured it was just another minor inconvenience that would resolve itself by lunch. The outage wasn't isolated to my house, though. Walking outside to check if maybe a squirrel had chewed through a cable somewhere, I noticed Mrs. Patterson across the street standing in her driveway, holding her phone up toward the sky like she was trying to summon better signal from the heavens. Her teenage son Kevin was doing the same thing from their front porch, looking genuinely distressed about being disconnected from his online gaming world. I called my internet provider and got the automated message every customer dreads. We are currently experiencing widespread service interruptions in your area. Estimated repair time is 24 to 48 hours. Great. I had 3 insurance claims due by Friday, all requiring photo uploads and detailed reports that needed to be submitted through our company portal. The coffee shop downtown would have to be my office for the next couple days. As I grabbed my laptop bag and headed for my car, that's when I first noticed the beat-up white van parked at the far end of our street. The van itself wasn't particularly unusual. Plenty of contractors and delivery drivers used our street as a shortcut to the main road. But this one had been sitting in the same spot for what looked like days, judging by the pile of fast food containers visible through the windshield and the layer of morning dew covering everything. What caught my attention were the modifications, several thin metal antennas poking out from the roof, and what appeared to be thick black cables snaking around the vehicle's exterior. The back doors had small holes drilled into them with more cables threading through, and I could swear I heard the faint hum of electronics running inside. The license plate was from out of state, somewhere back east, though I couldn't make out the exact state from my distance. A small solar panel had been jury-rigged to the roof with metal brackets, and the whole setup gave off this weird mad scientist vibe that made me pause longer than I probably should have. Part of me wanted to walk over and investigate, but the rational part of my brain reminded me that I had work to do, and this was probably just some electronics hobbyist taking a road trip. I spent most of Tuesday and Wednesday at various coffee shops around town, bouncing between locations when the Wi-Fi got too slow or crowded. Each time I drove home, that van was still there, always in the exact same position. By Thursday morning, I started paying closer attention to it during my comings and goings. The electronics inside were definitely running 24/7. I could see a faint blue glow emanating from the tinted rear windows even late at night, and that constant electrical humming never stopped. More unsettling was the fact that I never actually saw anyone get in or out of the vehicle, despite clear signs that someone was living inside. Empty energy drink cans accumulated around the driver's side, and occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of someone moving around in the back through the heavily tinted windows. The solar panel made sense now. Whoever was in there was powering some serious equipment without needing to run the engine. Thursday evening, our internet finally came back online, but instead of relief, I felt this growing unease about our mysterious neighbor. The van's presence had shifted from merely curious to genuinely concerning, especially since no one else on the street seemed to have noticed or cared about it. Friday morning brought the first real clue that something was seriously wrong. I was catching up on emails and uploading my delayed insurance reports when my computer started running incredibly slowly. Every web page took forever to load, and my company's file upload system kept timing out with error messages I'd never seen before. At first, I blamed it on post-outage network congestion, but when I ran a speed test, the results were baffling. My download speeds were normal, but my upload bandwidth was almost completely saturated, showing constant activity even when I wasn't doing anything online. The network monitor on my router revealed dozens of active connections to IP addresses I didn't recognize, all pushing data upstream at maximum capacity. I'd been in the insurance business long enough to know when something didn't add up, and this definitely qualified. My home network was behaving like it was running a server farm, not supporting one guy checking email and uploading claim photos. The timing couldn't be coincidental. The mysterious van shows up during an internet outage, then my network starts acting possessed the moment service returns. That weekend, I became obsessed with monitoring my network traffic. I installed bandwidth monitoring software and started keeping detailed logs of the suspicious activity. The data uploads were happening around the clock, but they intensified dramatically between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. when most of the neighborhood would be asleep. The destination IP addresses traced back to servers in countries I'd never heard of, and the volume of data being transmitted was staggering, sometimes upwards of 50 gigabytes per night. My monthly data usage had tripled without any changes to my own internet habits. The van remained in its position, and I started timing my dog walks to coincide with peak upload hours, hoping to catch some sign of activity. During one late-night excursion, I noticed that the blue glow from the van's windows pulsed rhythmically, almost like breathing, and the electronic humming had evolved into a more complex pattern of beeps and whirs. Whatever was happening inside that vehicle was definitely connected to what was happening to my network. The question was how, and more importantly, what kind of data was being pushed through my internet connection without my knowledge or consent. Monday morning arrived with an answer I never could have anticipated. I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang at exactly 7:30 a.m., an unusual time for visitors in our neighborhood. Through the peephole, I saw two people in dark suits holding official-looking badges and clipboards. My first thought was that someone had died, and they were here to notify next of kin. But when I opened the door, the reality was far more unsettling. "Good morning, sir. I'm Agent Rebecca Knox with the FBI, and this is Agent James Turner. We're conducting a cybersecurity investigation in this neighborhood and need to ask you a few questions about your internet usage." The woman's tone was professional but urgent, and both agents kept glancing toward the end of the street where the van sat. Agent Turner consulted his tablet and asked if I'd noticed any unusual network activity in the past week, any devices connecting to my Wi-Fi that I didn't recognize, or any significant changes in my internet performance. The specificity of their questions made it clear they already knew something was wrong. They weren't fishing for information. They were confirming what they'd already discovered through their own investigation. What came next made my stomach churn with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Agent Knox explained that my IP address had been flagged by federal monitoring systems for uploading encrypted files to servers associated with international cybercrime networks. The data transfers included classified documents stolen from government databases, financial information from compromised banking systems, and what she described as materials relevant to ongoing national security investigations. They showed me printouts of network logs with my home address and internet account information highlighted in yellow, alongside timestamps that perfectly matched the suspicious upload activity I'd been documenting. Turner asked if I had any knowledge of cryptocurrency mining operations, illegal file-sharing networks, or connections to foreign nationals who might have access to sensitive information. The surreal nature of the conversation hit me like a freight train. Here I was, a boring insurance adjuster who barely understood how to set up a wireless printer, being questioned by federal agents about international cybercrime. When I mentioned the van and my own suspicions about the network intrusions, both agents exchanged a look that told me I'd just confirmed something significant. Knox asked me to walk them through everything I'd observed about the vehicle, and I could see Turner taking detailed notes about the timeline, the equipment I'd described, and the correlation with my network problems. After I finished recounting my observations, Agent Knox explained what they'd pieced together from their investigation. The van belonged to a 38-year-old former software engineer named Anthony Carlisle, who'd lost his job at a major tech company 8 months earlier. Unable to afford rent, he'd been living out of his modified vehicle while traveling from town to town, targeting suburban neighborhoods with weak network security. Using high-powered wireless equipment and signal amplifiers, he'd been hijacking unsecured Wi-Fi networks and piggybacking on connections from homes with default router passwords. The setup was sophisticated. He could access multiple networks simultaneously, routing his illegal activities through different IP addresses to avoid detection, while making it appear as though homeowners were the ones uploading stolen data. Turner showed me photographs from other cities where Carlisle had operated, always targeting quiet residential areas where a parked van wouldn't draw immediate attention. His mobile setup included server-grade equipment powered by solar panels and portable batteries, allowing him to run complex operations for weeks without needing external power sources. The FBI had been tracking him across 4 states, following a trail of compromised networks and cyber intrusions that had cost businesses and government agencies millions of dollars in damages. The scope of what this guy had accomplished from the back of a beat-up van was genuinely terrifying. Agent Knox revealed that Carlisle had been selling access to compromised home networks on the dark web, essentially renting out innocent people's internet connections to criminals who needed clean IP addresses for their activities. My network had been used to upload everything from stolen credit card databases to classified military documents that had been breached from defense contractor systems. The encryption software he used was military-grade, making it nearly impossible for automated systems to detect the true nature of the data being transmitted until human analysts could review the patterns and destinations. Turner explained that they'd been monitoring certain international servers for months, watching as terabytes of sensitive information flowed through residential internet connections across the country. What made Carlisle particularly dangerous was his ability to make his intrusions look legitimate. The data transfers were timed to coincide with normal internet usage patterns, and he'd developed techniques to throttle his activities so they wouldn't cause obvious performance issues for the homeowners. If I hadn't been forced to work from home during the outage and hadn't been specifically monitoring my network, I probably never would have noticed anything unusual until the FBI showed up at my door. The arrest happened that same afternoon, and it was nothing like what I'd expected from watching crime shows on television. Around 3 p.m., I watched from my living room window as a convoy of unmarked vehicles quietly surrounded the van from multiple directions. There was no dramatic shouting or drawn weapons, just a coordinated approach that blocked all possible escape routes. Agent Knox had asked me to stay inside during the operation, but I couldn't resist watching as they carefully approached the vehicle. The rear doors of the van opened from the inside, and a thin man with unkempt hair and several days' worth of beard growth emerged with his hands already raised. He looked exactly like what you'd imagine a homeless tech worker would look like: wrinkled clothes, tired eyes, and the defeated posture of someone who knew his luck had finally run out. The inside of the van was a technological marvel crammed into a space barely larger than a walk-in closet. I could see multiple laptops, servers stacked on custom shelving, cooling fans and cables running everywhere like electronic spaghetti. The agent spent hours cataloging and removing equipment, filling several vehicles with confiscated hardware that represented months of sophisticated criminal activity, conducted from what most people would consider a moving homeless shelter. Within 48 hours, my internet connection returned to normal, and the constant background anxiety I hadn't realized I'd been carrying finally lifted. Agent Knox called to inform me that my network had been cleaned and secured, and that I wouldn't face any charges since I'd been an unwitting victim rather than a willing participant. The investigation revealed that Carlisle had been responsible for compromising over 200 residential networks across multiple states, facilitating millions of dollars in cybercrime activities while living completely off the grid. His mobile setup had been so effective that he could establish operations in a new location within hours and disappear just as quickly when he sensed law enforcement closing in. The case became a textbook example of how modern cybercriminals could exploit suburban vulnerabilities using nothing more than a vehicle and some sophisticated equipment. 3 months later, Carlisle pleaded guilty to federal charges including computer fraud, identity theft, and trafficking in stolen data, receiving a 12-year prison sentence. I still think about how close I came to being falsely accused of serious federal crimes, and how a simple internet outage ended up exposing a criminal operation that had been hiding in plain sight on my own street. These days, I keep my router password complex and my network monitoring software running 24/7, because now I know that sometimes the biggest threats come from the most unexpected places. I'm 28 years old, working 2 part-time jobs and barely scraping by after my divorce. That was me in March 2022. Single mom life in Pennsylvania wasn't exactly what I'd pictured when I was younger, but I was making it work for me and my 6-year-old daughter, Chloe. The retail job at the local department store paid minimum wage, and my weekend gig cleaning offices kept the lights on, but just barely. Every night after putting Chloe to bed, I'd scroll through job boards and Facebook groups, desperately looking for something better. The single moms supporting each other, Pittsburgh area group had become my lifeline for finding odd jobs, selling things I didn't need anymore, and getting advice from other women in similar situations. That Tuesday evening, while Chloe was asleep and I was eating leftover mac and cheese from a plastic container, I saw a post that seemed almost too good to be true. The posting was from someone named Amanda Clark, and it looked professional compared to the usual garage sale announcements and babysitting requests. She was recruiting for what she called premium childcare positions, with families who valued discretion and were willing to pay well for it. The starting rate was $25 an hour, more than double what I was making at the store, and the families supposedly needed live-in nannies for short-term assignments, usually 2 to 4 weeks at a time. Amanda mentioned that these were high-profile families who required thorough background checks and specialized training, but the compensation reflected the level of service they expected. She emphasized that positions were limited and only available to pre-screened candidates who demonstrated exceptional reliability and trustworthiness. The post had been up for only an hour and already had dozens of comments from desperate mothers like myself, all asking how to apply. Something about the way Amanda responded to each comment, professional, encouraging but vague about specifics, made me hesitate for just a moment before typing my own response. Within 20 minutes of commenting, I received a private message from Amanda. She thanked me for my interest and said my profile showed exactly the kind of dedication they were looking for in their program. The message included a link to a preliminary screening questionnaire that would help determine if I was a good fit for their exclusive network of trusted caregivers. The questions started normal enough: previous childcare experience, availability, references, but gradually became more personal. They wanted to know about my financial situation, whether I had reliable transportation, if I lived alone, and even asked about my relationship status and family support system. One question that struck me as odd asked whether I would be comfortable working in confidential environments where discretion about family dynamics is paramount. Another asked if I had any issues with traveling on short notice or staying in locations without reliable cell service. I told myself these were probably standard questions for high-end families who valued their privacy. The follow-up came faster than any legitimate job inquiry I'd ever experienced. Amanda called me directly the next morning while I was getting Chloe ready for school, and her voice had this weird, overly cheerful quality that reminded me of a telemarketer. She congratulated me on passing the initial screening and said they wanted to move forward with a video interview that afternoon. When I mentioned I'd need to arrange childcare, she quickly suggested we do it after 8 p.m. instead, when the little ones are tucked away safely. During the call, she kept referring to their operation as a family placement network and mentioned that successful candidates would gain access to their private member portal where they could browse available positions. She also mentioned something about additional training modules that would help me understand family-specific protocols and behavioral expectations. The way she said behavioral expectations with such emphasis made my skin crawl a little. but I pushed the feeling aside because I really needed this opportunity to work out. The video interview that evening was conducted through an app I'd never heard of called SecureLink, which Amanda said was required for client confidentiality purposes. She appeared on screen in what looked like a generic office space with motivational posters in the background, wearing a crisp blazer that seemed a bit too formal for an evening call. Her questions focused heavily on my flexibility and willingness to adapt to unique family situations. She asked if I had any moral or religious objections to alternative family structures, and whether I would be comfortable signing strict non-disclosure agreements. When I asked for more details about what these alternative structures might involve, she laughed it off and said every family was different, but that discretion was the most important quality they looked for. Near the end of the interview, she mentioned that successful candidates would receive a welcome package with their login credentials and access codes, but emphasized that sharing these with anyone would result in immediate termination and potential legal action. The whole conversation lasted exactly 30 minutes, and she ended it by saying I'd hear back within 48 hours about next steps. True to her word, Amanda contacted me exactly 2 days later with what she called wonderful news. She said I'd been selected for their premium placement program and would be receiving my member access within the hour. The email that followed contained a link that looked nothing like a normal website address. It was a jumbled mess of letters and numbers, followed by .onion, which meant absolutely nothing to me at the time. Amanda's instructions were specific. Download something called Tor browser, use only this browser to access the link, and never attempt to access the member portal from my regular internet browser or public Wi-Fi. She explained this was all for enhanced security protocols to protect both the families and caregivers in their network. The email also included a temporary username and password, along with a warning that I had 24 hours to log in and complete my profile setup, or my access would be permanently revoked. Looking back now, every single red flag was waving right in front of my face, but desperation has a way of making you blind to obvious dangers. That Friday night after Chloe was asleep, I downloaded the Tor browser and followed Amanda's instructions to access the member portal. The login process took several minutes and required multiple verification steps, including answering security questions about information I'd provided in my screening forms. When the site finally loaded, it looked surprisingly professional. Clean design, official-looking logos, and what appeared to be a legitimate job board interface. The main page welcomed me to the Elite Family Care Network and displayed a dashboard with different sections: available positions, training modules, member directory, and compliance guidelines. At first glance, it seemed like an upscale version of any other caregiving platform I'd used before. The available positions section showed listings for families across various states, each with detailed requirements and surprisingly high pay rates. One listing caught my attention immediately: a family in Vermont offering $800 per week for specialized childcare services, with a start date just 3 days away. But as I clicked deeper into the profiles, things started to feel increasingly wrong. The family descriptions were oddly clinical, referring to children by age and gender rather than names, and including detailed physical descriptions that seemed unnecessary for a babysitting job. Some listings mentioned behavioral modification programs and compliance training requirements that made my stomach churn. The training modules section was even more disturbing. Courses with titles like Managing Resistance and Defiance, Physical Restraint Techniques, and Maintaining Subject Cooperation during Transition Periods. The language throughout the site kept referring to children as subjects and families as clients, which felt dehumanizing in a way I couldn't quite articulate. When I clicked on the member directory, I saw profiles of other women like myself, single mothers, students, women in financial distress, but their profiles included personal information that seemed way too detailed, including photos, addresses, and what appeared to be psychological evaluations. The most chilling part was a section called Performance Reviews, where clients could rate caregivers on categories like obedience, discretion level, and adaptability to special requests. My heart started pounding as I navigated to a forum section I hadn't noticed initially. The discussion threads had titles that made my skin crawl: transport protocols for reluctant subjects, maintaining cover stories during law enforcement encounters, and compensation rates for extended isolation assignments. One thread was discussing a caregiver who had apparently broken protocol by trying to contact authorities about a situation, and the responses detailed how her access had been revoked and her security deposit forfeited. Another thread contained what appeared to be coded language about moving children between locations, with references to packages and delivery schedules that clearly weren't talking about normal childcare activities. The forum members used profile pictures that were obviously fake, stock photos of smiling women that probably came from some generic website. But what terrified me most was a pinned post at the top of the forum titled "New Member Orientation Reminder," which outlined consequences for breaching confidentiality agreements, including financial penalties that could reach tens of thousands of dollars, and warnings about more severe measures for those who posed security risks to the network. The final straw came when I accidentally clicked on a subforum labeled Special Services Directory. The page that loaded contained categorized listings that made it immediately clear this wasn't about childcare at all. Categories included things like procurement services, long-term housing solutions, and relocation assistance, all with price tags that were astronomical compared to normal babysitting rates. Some listings included photos that were clearly taken without the subject's knowledge, and requests for specific physical characteristics and age ranges that made me physically sick. There were detailed discussions about acquisition methods and processing centers in remote locations across different states. One particularly horrifying thread contained instructions for new recruiters on how to identify and approach vulnerable targets through social media and community groups. The realization hit me like a freight train. I wasn't looking at a legitimate childcare network. I was looking at some kind of organized trafficking operation that used fake job postings to lure desperate women into their system. The behavioral compliance services weren't about managing difficult children. They were about controlling and exploiting the people they recruited through false promises of employment. I slammed my laptop shut so hard I was afraid I'd crack the screen, but I couldn't stop my mind from racing through everything I'd just seen. The professional-looking website, the careful screening questions, Amanda's emphasis on discretion and non-disclosure agreements. It had all been designed to identify vulnerable women who wouldn't be missed if they disappeared. The financial desperation they'd asked about wasn't to gauge my reliability. It was to determine how easily I could be manipulated. The questions about my support system and living situation weren't standard background checks. They were assessing whether anyone would come looking for me if I vanished. I realized that by providing all that personal information, I'd essentially given them a blueprint for how to target me. The scariest part was thinking about how close I'd come to accepting that Vermont position, 3 days away, in a remote location, with people who clearly weren't running a legitimate childcare operation. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, checking and double-checking that my doors were locked, jumping at every sound outside my apartment. The next morning, I deleted the Tor browser from my computer and tried to forget everything I'd seen. But I couldn't stop thinking about the other women whose profiles I'd viewed in that member directory. How many of them had fallen for the same trap I'd almost walked into? How many were still out there, thinking they were working legitimate childcare jobs while being exploited in ways I didn't want to imagine? I never heard from Amanda again after that night. No follow-up calls asking why I hadn't accepted any positions. No emails about new opportunities. It was like I'd never existed in their system at all, which somehow made the whole experience even more terrifying. I reported what I'd found to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, though I doubted they'd be able to do much with a link that probably led nowhere by the time they investigated. 3 years later, I still get anxious when I see job postings that seem too good to be true, and I've never been able to bring myself to join another online job group. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, using the same tactics on other desperate mothers, and whether my report actually helped anyone or just disappeared into some government database never to be seen again. It all started on a quiet Thursday evening while I was finishing some grading. I work as a high school art teacher in a small town just outside Lincoln, Nebraska. Back then, I lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom house I inherited from my grandmother. Nothing fancy, just cozy and filled with thrift store furniture, and my own paintings hanging crookedly on the walls. I wasn't dating anyone at the time, and I didn't have the energy or interest to download any of those apps. Between work, walking my dog Jasper, and FaceTiming my sister every weekend, my days were full. So when I got a message on Instagram from a complete stranger, I assumed it was spam and ignored it. Until I got another one, and another, and they weren't just random pickup lines or bots, they were personal. Way too personal. The first message just said, "Still thinking about that story you told me, you're wild." I assumed it was a mistake. The next one was explicit, referencing things I'd never say to anyone, let alone post online. Then someone named Travis messaged me asking if I was still into older guys, and said it was cool I was so open about my kinks. At that point, I clicked on his profile. Regular-looking guy, nothing suspicious. I replied asking who he thought I was. His response knocked the wind out of me. We matched on Warm-Hearted, remember? The dark mode app? You told me all this, even sent photos." I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He didn't believe me at first, said I was ghosting him and that I shouldn't play games. That was the moment I realized something was deeply wrong. I spent the next few hours digging. I searched for Warm-Hearted and found nothing on regular search engines. It wasn't until I went through a Reddit thread about dating apps with no surface trace that I saw someone mention a string of platforms hosted on the dark web. I've never had any reason to go into that side of the internet before. It freaked me out, but I couldn't sleep. I had to know. I messaged someone on the thread who shared a link through a Tor browser and told me to be careful because some of these places were twisted. I set up everything late that night, with my laptop screen dimmed and Jasper curled at my feet. When I finally accessed the site, I was expecting some obscure profile pic or AI-generated lookalike. Instead, my actual face was staring back at me. The profile was under my full name, not a variation, my name. The photo was cropped from an old college graduation pic I'd only ever shared in a private Facebook album. The bio listed my real hometown, my favorite band, even a joke I once wrote to my sister over email back in 2015. It had been scraped from everywhere. Posts, comments, old usernames I forgot I had. But it didn't stop there. The page was loaded with stories supposedly written by me, each one more explicit than the last. Some were paired with blurry, suggestive images clearly pulled from years of photos, beach trips, Halloween costumes, even one where I was just wearing a tank top on my couch. It was like someone had carefully dissected my life and twisted it into bait. I clicked through a few of the conversations she, this fake version of me, had with different men. They all sounded real. Like actual chats with details and rhythm that could fool anyone. I sat there for hours just clicking, reading, trying to understand how deep this went. The messages weren't random. Some of them included audio clips. One had me laughing, breathy and flirtatious, though I swear on everything I love that I never recorded anything like that. But the voice was close enough to mine that I couldn't completely rule it out as AI modified. The worst part was the pattern. Every few chats ended with the fake me either asking for money, usually framed like I was going through a hard time, or dropping enough personal details to make the guy emotionally hooked. It was clear that someone was using my identity not just to catfish, but to manipulate these men into sending money, gifts, even their home addresses. I wasn't just stolen, I was being weaponized. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I called my sister, Morgan, who works in cybersecurity. I didn't even know how to explain it without sounding insane. She kept asking if I gave out passwords or clicked on sketchy links, but I hadn't. Not in years. I've always been pretty careful. She had me forward her screenshots and walk her through everything I saw. That evening, she confirmed what I already feared. Someone had likely been collecting pieces of my online presence for years. "It's not a breach," she said. "It's a buildup. Someone was patient." Her guess? Old social media accounts, forgotten forums, email leaks. All of it compiled, filtered, and used to create this terrifyingly real version of me. I contacted Warmhearted through the only email I could find from someone on that forum. It bounced. Tried again with a slightly different address, nothing. That site had no support, no takedown process, no TIAS, no links, just profiles and private messaging. Morgan said it was probably hosted through multiple relays, making it nearly impossible to trace or shut down. I felt sick. It wasn't just about the humiliation. It was about control. The idea that someone else could live as me online, say whatever they wanted, seduce strangers under my name, and I had no power to stop it, that wrecked something in me. I kept thinking of the men who were messaging me, genuinely believing they'd talk to me. What if one of them showed up at my house thinking I owed him something? A week later, it nearly happened. A man showed up in front of my porch one evening, parked in a dented silver SUV with out-of-state plates. He just sat there. I watched him through the blinds for a full 10 minutes. Jasper was growling low, his ears pinned back like he sensed something wrong. The guy never knocked. He didn't even get out, just kept looking at his phone, then up at the house. I finally turned on the porch light and called Morgan. While I was on the line, he drove off. No plate number. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept the lights on in every room. Every sound made me flinch. That's when I realized this wasn't just digital anymore. It was crossing into my real life, and whoever created that version of me, they didn't care what happened next. Morgan helped me take the first steps to clean things up. We ran data traces on old accounts, wiped what we could, and set up alerts for my name across deeper search layers. I filed a police report, not that I expected much from it. The officer I spoke to looked like he barely understood what I was saying. He took down the info and said something about identity theft, but when I mentioned the dark web, he just nodded slowly like I'd started speaking in another language. I didn't blame him. Even saying it out loud made it feel unreal. But I needed it documented, just in case someone else decided to show up, just in case something worse happened. The hardest part wasn't the fear, it was the helplessness. Every time I opened my laptop, I half expected to find new messages, new men who thought they knew me. I started checking my own reflection differently, wondering how many people had stared at my photos thinking they were speaking to me. I stopped posting online altogether, deleted my Instagram, made my Facebook private and cleared out old photos, even backed out of a gallery opening because I didn't want my face on posters. It's like I had to become invisible to reclaim my identity, erase myself to be safe. I felt violated in a way I didn't know how to describe, like someone had been breathing down my neck for months, and I only just noticed. About 6 weeks later, the messages stopped. Completely. No more DMs, no strange cars, no emails from confused strangers. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it never did. Morgan thinks the profile was either shut down manually or replaced with someone else's face. Maybe the scammer got spooked. Maybe they found someone better. I'll never know. I still have the screenshots, still have a hard drive with everything we could recover. I keep it locked in a drawer in my desk, not because I want to revisit it, but because a part of me is afraid I'll need proof again someday. It's been almost a year now. I moved apartments, got a new phone, changed jobs, started going by my middle name professionally just to put some distance between me and whatever version of me is still floating around out there. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if any of those guys still believe they talk to the real me, if they think I scammed them, or if they were just part of the same trap I was. All I know is that my identity was stolen in a way I never saw coming. Not for credit cards or loans, but for attention. For manipulation. For some stranger's twisted game. And no firewall in the world could have protected me from that. I'd just been laid off for the second time in less than a year. I worked IT contract jobs around the Bay Area, mostly back-end security stuff. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. When the startup I was with folded, I had maybe 3 months of savings and no interviews lined up. I was crashing at my cousin's place in San Bruno, sleeping on a creaky futon and trying to convince myself this was just temporary. Most days were spent scouring job boards, pitching for gigs that paid less than minimum wage once you factored in the time. I joined all the usual freelancer sites, but it felt like screaming into a void. That's when I started poking around in places I probably shouldn't have. A guy I knew from a cybersecurity Discord dropped a vague message one night. There's a board with gigs that don't show up on LinkedIn. No links, just enough to spark curiosity. It took a few days of digging through weird forums and onion links, but I eventually found it. The login screen looked like a bank's backend from the 2000s. Clean, sterile, with a blinking login field and no branding. The job postings were strange. Titles like Validate ACH Endpoints, Remote KYC Agent, or simply Confirm Access. One of them caught my eye. Fast payout, low risk. No questions. The description was vague. Something about confirming an address and submitting identity verification documents for a locked account. It paid $1,000 in crypto up front. I knew it sounded shady, but after a month of sending out resumes with 0 responses and watching my savings shrink, I justified it to myself. I figured maybe it was someone trying to unlock their own frozen crypto or bypassing a platform's KYC. Not legal, but not dangerous, right? I submitted a burner email and filled out the form. It asked for a scan of a government ID, a selfie holding it, and a utility bill. It didn't even occur to me how reckless that was. I used an old internet bill with my name and address, figured they'd reject it or ghost me. But within 24 hours I got a confirmation, and the payment hit my wallet. No follow-up, no message, nothing. For a while I forgot about it. I kept looking for gigs, picked up some remote server maintenance for a guy in Ohio, and tried to put the whole thing behind me. Then a letter came in the mail, a real physical envelope with a court seal on the flap. At first I thought it was junk, but when I opened it, the first thing I saw was my name listed in a fraud case involving a fake mortgage application in Arizona. They said my documents were used to open an account under a shell corporation that had laundered over $200,000 in flagged transfers. The date on the file? 2 weeks after I submitted that form. I didn't know what to do. I kept rereading the letter, hoping I'd misunderstood something. But everything matched. My name, my old address, even the utility bill I'd used. I couldn't breathe properly. It felt like being caught for a crime I didn't commit, and worse, not even understanding what the hell I'd been dragged into. I called the number on the document and got connected to a case officer. Her tone wasn't aggressive, but it was clear she thought I had answers. When I told her the truth, that I'd submitted those documents for a job online, there was a long pause. She didn't say, "You're screwed," but it was written all over her voice. She asked me to come in for a formal statement at a field office, which I did 2 days later. I brought everything: screenshots, wallet records, even the old laptop I'd used. They took it all. The officer, her name was Clarice. I remember that because she had a keychain with it carved into wood. Asked if I'd ever interacted with someone named Wilmer Clay. I hadn't. Never even heard the name. She didn't explain who he was, but I could tell it mattered. After a couple hours, they let me go. Said I wasn't being charged, but I should stay reachable in case they needed more. That "in case" hung over me like a weight I couldn't shake. The weirdest part started after that. I noticed my inbox filling up with strange notifications. Failed login attempts from random locations, subscription confirmations I hadn't made, even a notice from a gym in Minneapolis welcoming me as a new member. My cousin told me I was being paranoid. That identity theft always has some ripple effect. But it didn't stop there. One night while sorting through my bank statements, I found an auto payment for a storage unit in Kansas under my name. I'd never been to Kansas. I called the company pretending I was verifying my own info. The lady on the other end casually said the unit had been rented 2 weeks ago, in person. I felt something shift after that, like whatever I'd brushed against online wasn't finished with me. I called the case officer again and told her about the storage unit. She didn't say much, just said she'd pass it along to the lead. But later that night, around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 9 seconds long. No voice. Just this low electrical hum, like an engine idling in a closed garage. I tried playing it again and again, but each time it gave me this pounding behind my eyes, like my brain was rejecting the sound. I deleted it. I don't know why. Maybe I just didn't want it on my phone anymore. A couple of days later, a package showed up on the porch. No return address, no tracking label. Just my name, handwritten in thick black marker. Inside was a small flash drive and a folded piece of paper that only said, "You were useful." Nothing else. No threats, no demands. I didn't plug it in. I drove straight to the local police station and handed it over. The officer at the front desk gave me a look like I was being dramatic, but they took it. I never heard back about it. Not a word. I don't even know if they looked at what was on it. Maybe they did and decided not to tell me. After that, I wiped every device I owned, got a new phone, changed all my passwords, set up credit freezes and fraud alerts with every agency I could find. I still couldn't sleep properly. I'd wake up convinced someone was in the hallway even though the door was locked and the security cam never caught anything. My cousin started getting creeped out too. Said he once saw a guy across the street in a parked car staring at our window for almost an hour. When he went outside to confront him, the car was gone. No engine noise, no headlights. Just gone. Eventually I moved out and left the state. I took a full-time job doing database maintenance in a smaller town where nobody knew me. Things have been quiet since then. No more strange charges, no more voicemails, no more silent packages. But every now and then, I still get emails with subject lines in Cyrillic or random character strings that look like code. I don't open them, I just report and delete. Maybe it's spam, maybe it's not. Either way, I don't want to find out. I wish I could say I learned some deep life lesson from all this, but honestly, I didn't. I got desperate. I made a dumb choice. And I think someone out there still has a piece of me stored on some drive waiting. Just because the noise stopped doesn't mean it's over. It just means they don't need me right now.